He renounced the throne and traveled barefoot across deserts, forests, and scorching paths to push his body to its absolute limits. After starving for weeks, he trained both body and mind to endure anything because he sought divine powers to save everyone. The tale begins 2,500 years ago when a tribe known as the Aryans moved into the lands beside the Indus River at the base of the Himalayas. They overcame the inhabitants living there and seized control. Over time, their rule expanded into multiple kingdoms throughout the region. Among these was the kingdom of Kosala, which grew powerful and continually pressured the nearby Shakya kingdom, sending its forces to conquer it whenever an opportunity appeared. Whenever war erupted, countless people lost their lives, their lands were devastated, and many were enslaved. Everyone suffered, living in misery and hoping for someone who could save them. Meanwhile, within a monk temple somewhere in the Himalayas, a great monk named Asya sensed a strong presence from the south and instructed his disciple Narada to descend the mountain and search for a remarkable man who would become the Chakrardan king. A few years later, King Sadhana of the Shakya kingdom entered the forest for one of his usual hunting trips and witnessed an astonishing miracle. All the forest animals gathered peacefully around him in silence. Suddenly, a messenger arrived to inform him that the queen was summoning him. They hurried back to the palace, where his wife, Queen Maya, revealed that she had seen a vision of a magnificent elephant with 6 tusks entering her body. Upon hearing this, Sadhana was delighted. He told her about the miracle he had just witnessed and said he felt that every living creature in the land had given them its blessing. Pointing at the river, he added, "Even though drought usually threatens at this time of year, there is no sign of it now." And he declared that this must be because of the child she would soon give birth to. Meanwhile, outside the castle, a group of Shakya soldiers marched through the poverty-stricken streets of their homeland, escorting several prisoners. Their procession drew the attention of a young slave boy named Chupra, who tried to get a closer look but accidentally bumped into local thugs. Noticing valuable items in his basket, the thugs demanded he hand them over if he wanted to be released. Chupra immediately fled, forcing the thugs to chase him through the crowded streets until he slipped into a narrow alley. Just as he paused to catch his breath, a small boy named Tata suddenly leaped over him and snatched the fabric he carried. Later, when Chupra told his owner what had happened, the poor boy was viciously whipped. When his mother heard the news, she rushed in and begged the owner to punish her instead. The owner refused, stating that the woman was their property, but he showed a bit of mercy by giving Chupra 3 days to retrieve the missing fabric. He warned that if Chupra failed, he would sell his mother. Unable to bear the idea of losing her, Chupra wandered through the bustling market, where he spotted the same fabric being sold in a shop. He tried to steal it back and escape, but he was quickly caught and badly beaten. After stumbling down some steps, he made a silent vow to do whatever it took to stop the slave traders from selling his mother. At that moment, the small thief from earlier, Tata, appeared atop a wall with his friends, laughing at him. Chupra demanded the fabric be returned, but Tata only laughed harder and ordered his friends to attack. Chupra knocked several of them down, but they soon overwhelmed him with their numbers and beat him severely. Lying bruised and exhausted, he begged the boy to return the fabric, trying to explain the consequences. Later, Chupra regained consciousness inside a dilapidated shack, where Tata was waiting. Tata called for his sister to treat Chupra's wounds. She arrived and gave him a bitter medicine they had made by boiling whatever roots they could gather nearby. Afterward, Tata introduced himself and admitted that he had already sold the stolen fabric. Chupra protested loudly, but Tata's sister sharply told him that they survived by stealing from others and mocked him, saying he must have simply been daydreaming while his belongings disappeared. Chupra explained that losing the fabric meant he might never see his mother again. Hearing this, they felt sympathy, and Tata offered to help him rescue her. Later that day, the slave traders led the women away to be sold, including Chupra's mother. At that moment, a tiger suddenly emerged from the jungle and killed both traders instantly. It then turned toward Chupra's mother, but before it could attack, Chupra ran toward it with stones in hand. Before he could throw them, the tiger backed away into the bushes, where Tata's spirit exited the animal and returned to his body. Surrounded by creatures, the young boy stood smiling. Coincidentally, a passing monk named Narada saw this and wondered if the boy was the blessed one his teacher Asya had foretold. But before they could celebrate, the army of Kosala arrived to attack Kapilavastu, the capital of the Shakya kingdom. Tata explained to Chupra that Kosala sought to expand its territory and that the army would pass through his village. Fearing for his family, he panicked and rushed off to reach the village in time. Kosala's army general appeared to be a cruel, merciless man who took pleasure in killing, laughing like a madman. As the army stormed through the village, Tata desperately searched for his mother and sister, only to find them dead. Devastated, the boy swore vengeance, and Chupra promised to support him. Later that night, as Kosala's army set up camp to celebrate before advancing to the capital, Chupra and Tata quietly observed them from afar, frustrated by how difficult it was to reach the general. Then Tata revealed his plan. He projected his spirit into one of Kosala's horses, causing chaos in the camp. Chupra seized the moment and mounted the possessed horse to approach the general, aiming several arrows and hurling them at him. The general narrowly avoided death by turning his head at the last moment. Moments later, Chupra and the horse found themselves surrounded by spearmen. But before they could strike, a massive swarm of locusts descended on the camp, throwing everything into disorder. Taking advantage of the confusion, Tata and Chupra chased the general to a river, where he slipped into the water. His luck turned even worse as hungry crocodiles closed in. Chupra prepared to end him with an arrow to avenge Tata's family, but he hesitated, questioning whether he wanted to remain a slave forever. Terrified, the general begged for his life, offering all his wealth in exchange for rescue. Ignoring Tata's enraged protests, Chupra killed the crocodiles one by one, then jumped in to pull the general to safety. He apologized to Tata, explaining that this man could lift him into Kosala's ranks, calling it a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity granted by the heavens. Chupra outlined his plan to gain influence in the army and insisted it was the only path for slaves like them to escape their harsh lives. Against his instincts, Tata reluctantly agreed. The next day, a soldier rushed to inform King Sadhana that the Kosala army had retreated from the Rohini River overnight after losing most of its supplies to the locust swarm, and that General Bude was now reported missing. King Sadhana smiled with relief as the Shakya soldiers celebrated. He then told his wife Maya she could safely return to her homeland to give birth. At the same time, Tata and Chupra arrived at the Kosala base camp. Chupra thanked Tata for agreeing to his selfish plan and asked him to return home and tell his mother he would come for her one day. After Tata departed, Chupra carried General Bude into the camp, where the Kosala soldiers rushed forward calling for medics. Chupra collapsed, pretending exhaustion as if he had carried the general all the way, letting events unfold exactly as he intended. When the general awoke, he summoned the boy and asked how he could repay him. Chupra simply told him to rest. The general then offered to adopt him and take him into his service, and Chupra accepted immediately. The scene shifted back to the Shakya kingdom, where Queen Maya was being escorted to her homeland. Her guards set up camp near the Rohini River, as they had to cross it to reach their destination. Every soldier was ordered to protect her at all costs. At dawn, as the sun climbed, animals gathered under a tree, signaling that the heir had been born. The queen told her newborn that the entire world was offering its blessings, but her health quickly began to decline. The escorts rushed her and the baby back to the palace, where King Sadhana hurried to meet them. Maya asked the king to see the child and requested that he name him Siddhartha. The king smiled, saying it was a strong name, explaining that it meant the one who has accomplished his aims. As her strength faded, Maya held her baby and gently touched his face before passing away, leaving him in his father's care. Soon after, the great monk arrived to see the infant. The moment he looked at the child, he was overwhelmed with awe, observing the baby pointing one finger to the sky and one to the earth, symbolizing that he had no equal in heaven or on earth. He prophesied that the boy would grow into a chakra king, though he himself would no longer be alive to witness it. 10 years passed, and a group of local dancers attempted to entertain Siddhartha, but he became bored and left the room. Meanwhile, 2 royal attendants, Vizier and Gautami, searched for him because his father wanted to see him. The boy spoke from behind a tree and asked them again about the forecast system. They repeated the lesson, explaining that the highest caste, the Brahmins, consisted of monks who prayed for prosperity. The prince scoffed at the idea that a nation could flourish solely through monks' prayers. They tried to persuade him that both he and his father were bound to obey the Brahmins, then continued, saying the next caste was the Kshatriyas, which included great warriors and nobles like him. Below them were the commoners and merchants, known as the Vaishyas, and at the bottom were the Shudras, who included slaves and manual laborers. Siddhartha questioned this nonsense, asking why the slaves were placed at the bottom, but the two attendants quickly escorted him to the king. At the throne, a warrior named Bandaka was being commended for his achievements in Magadha, and the king urged him to continue working for the nation's prosperity as he appointed him the new general. When Siddhartha arrived, his father introduced the prince to Bandaka, saying he was a master archer. Over the past 10 years, Kosala had dominated the region, crushing hostile neighbors with decisive victories. As the army returned from its latest triumph, soldiers and citizens cheered Chupra's name, praising him with admiration. Everyone knew General Bude had adopted him as his son, and word had spread through the ranks that Chupra was now the chosen heir to the general's legacy. Riding through the cheering crowds, Chupra smiled, proud of how far he had risen. Back in Shakya, a monk was teaching the Kshatriya children, telling them they must become strong warriors capable of defeating the Kosala army. Among the students, Siddhartha stood and asked what happened to the dead after their funerals. The teacher became irritated and ordered him to sit down and stop wasting time. The prince's friends argued that the old man's lessons were dull, and they persuaded him to skip class. The small group snuck into the forest, where Siddhartha admitted he had never stepped outside the palace before. At that moment, the two boys spotted a rabbit and chased it. When one of them aimed an arrow, Siddhartha leaped on him, allowing the rabbit to escape. The two chased after it again while the prince remained behind, saddened because he could not tolerate seeing any living creature harmed. Wandering alone, he eventually lost his way and entered a bright clearing where a dark-skinned monk played a musical instrument. Siddhartha sat before him, wondering whether the moment was a dream. Meanwhile, Jaka became trapped in sinking mud and screamed for help. Siddhartha and the other boy tried to pull him out using a tree branch, but the boy could only grasp the weakened end, which snapped as soon as he grabbed it, making him sink deeper until his life slipped away. Devastated with grief, the prince ran to his stepmother, who embraced him, relieved he was safe. But when he cried that Jaka had died, he collapsed with sorrow. She urged him to rest, then went to the king, blaming herself for the tragedy. But the king told her the boy's fragility came from his birth mother, Maya, and assured her she had cared for him well. He then declared that now that the boy had turned 10, it was time for him to begin martial arts training. The next day, while Siddhartha is calmly sitting and playing with a butterfly, an arrow suddenly hits and kills the butterfly, startling and enraging the prince just as his father's general, Bandaka, appears, followed immediately by the king, who tells the boy that this man will be his martial arts instructor from this day forward. Sadhana orders Bandaka not to show him any mercy simply because he is the prince, and the general eagerly accepts. Later on, Bandaka brings Siddhartha to practice archery and demonstrates his mastery with several flawless shots. But when the prince is told to give it a try, he can barely pull the bowstring and fails to shoot properly. During another session, the soldiers observe General Bandaka relentlessly pushing the young prince to his limits, even though he is only 10, repeatedly striking at him to force him to defend himself. As the training goes on, the general takes Siddhartha horseback riding and starts shooting animals purely for entertainment, causing the boy to plead with him to stop. Bandaka tells him to quit being weak, then chases after a deer while the prince runs behind him, begging him to leave it unharmed. When Bandaka attempts a perfect shot, Siddhartha purposely fires an arrow into the ground to distract him, letting the deer escape. The general then tells the boy that a king must be powerful and has no use for compassion before dismissing him for the day. And just like that, 5 years pass, and in the lively city of Savatthi in the Koala Kingdom, crowds cheer as Chupra stands in the arena battling a fierce opponent. His movements are sharp and unwavering, drawing the admiration of a noblewoman who cannot hide her fascination as he swiftly overcomes his challenger. He wins one match after another, and even when it seems the fight might turn against him, the lady's concern only drives him harder until he claims victory again. Later, General Budhai meets Chupra and congratulates him, saying that if he wins tomorrow's final match, the king's trophy will be his along with the title of Hero of the People. Chupra bows confidently, determined not to dishonor his name. At that moment, the noblewoman from before approaches and offers him a flower, wishing for his success. When she leaves, the general reveals that she is Lady Malikika, the vizier's daughter. Holding her flower, Chupra feels as if triumph is already within reach. The next day, Lord Chupra enters the arena to roaring cheers and faces his last opponent, Lord Bendika, the eldest son of a noble house. When the host signals, the two warriors charge forward and crash their swords together. Chupra is clearly at a disadvantage due to his smaller frame, and every strike he makes is deflected by Bendika, who soon knocks him off his horse. But Chupra refuses to give up and leaps toward him, though Bendika maneuvers his horse around and kicks him to the ground again. He then charges forward with his blade aimed at the boy, but Chupra narrowly dodges by jumping high and grabbing the saddle. Climbing behind Bendika, he drags him off the horse by choking him, sending both fighters tumbling to the dirt. Witnessing this, Malikika runs off in tears while the crowd urges the men to stand. Chupra rises and attempts a leaping punch, but Bendika knocks him back with his powerful arms. He then tries to crush him by jumping onto him, but Chupra barely escapes by rolling aside. After getting up again, Bendika lands a punch to Chupra's face that knocks him out briefly, then lifts him by the head and pummels him mercilessly. Afterward, he raises his fists in triumph, but Chupra forces himself back to his feet and declares the fight isn't over. Furious, Bendika grabs his sword and swings, but Chupra dodges and picks up rocks, throwing them to knock the weapon from his opponent's hand. He then snatches the sword and holds it to Bendika's face before knocking him out with the hilt, breaking several of his teeth. With that, he proclaims victory and earns the title of Hero of the People along with the king's trophy. Later, Lady Malika tends to Chupra's wounds herself while he winces and asks her to be gentle, and she admits how painful it was to watch the match. Meanwhile, the vizier drinks with General Budhai and expresses his desire for Chupra to marry his daughter. General Budhai gladly accepts the idea, seeing it as a great honor for both families. But then the vizier raises a troubling concern, asking whether Chupra is truly the son of his late older sister, catching the general off guard and making him fear the truth may surface. Budhai remembers the night a low-caste boy saved his life and secretly summons Chupra late that night, warning him that if anyone discovers he was born a Shudra, disaster will fall upon them both, urging him to protect the secret at any cost before leaving him with the warning. Meanwhile, in the Sakya kingdom, Siddhartha has matured into a strong young prince. He impresses General Bandaka during training, and the Sakya soldiers admire how quickly he has grown. King Sadhana beams with pride to see his son become so capable at the age of 15, and even the general approves of Siddhartha's progress. Later that evening, the prince slips away as he usually does, while the royal guards chase after him to bring him back. But Siddhartha easily outruns them and escapes. Riding swiftly through the city on horseback, he comes across a grieving couple mourning their dead child. Soon more people emerge, saying they are outcasts suffering from disease and begging Siddhartha for money. Without hesitation, the prince removes his silk garments and expensive ornaments, tossing them aside as the slum dwellers scramble to grab them. Just then, local thugs arrive to steal the treasures, kicking the sick outcasts away and saying dying people have no need for such luxuries as they seize everything for themselves. After robbing the outcasts, the thugs turn their greedy eyes toward Siddhartha. But before they can touch him, a woman appears and orders them to leave him alone. The thugs call her their sister and complain as she threatens that if any of them harms the boy, they will all be executed. Though confused, they reluctantly obey and back off. After they leave, the woman also walks away and tells him to return home because everyone is searching for him. Siddhartha tries to stop her. She pauses and introduces herself as Meghala, advising the prince not to give his belongings to the outcasts. She explains that they are people abandoned by their families, half alive and simply waiting for death. She tells him he cannot comprehend life outside the palace, which angers Siddhartha, who asks whether she knows a world he does not. The next day, Meghala guides the prince through the town, and Siddhartha grows sad seeing what the people eat. Meghala pushes him along, but he keeps stopping whenever he sees someone in miserable condition. Meghala asks why he is so drawn to such suffering, but before he can answer, Siddhartha witnesses a slave being savagely beaten for stealing fruit and trying to run. The prince cries as he realizes what his people endure, but Meghala reminds him that everyone must die eventually and that all humans are equal regardless of caste or position. Later that day, the prince cannot concentrate on training and leaves early. He calls it a beautiful day and rides out to find Meghala. They spend time in the town and observe everything from a boat. Meghala asks whether it is proper for him to be with her like this, since someone like her would normally not be allowed to speak with him. The The prince reminds her of her own words, that both of them are human. Hearing this, Megala pushes him into the water, telling him to swim with her, while General Bandaka secretly watches with a wicked grin. Later, the prince is summoned before the king and is scolded when the king asks whether he has been spending time with a low-born commoner. The prince is disgusted when Sadhana refers to Megala as a lowly commoner and shouts back in protest. But the king raises his voice, reminding him that he is the kingdom's future and must strengthen the nation. As he leaves, he forbids Siddhartha from leaving the palace, while General Bandaka eavesdrops and smirks with satisfaction. That evening, as Megala admires the river, the general arrives with his soldiers, has her arrested, and orders her to be tied to a cross for execution. As she screams Siddhartha's name, the prince struggles desperately to break free from the guards so he can reach his father and stop her death. Siddhartha eventually breaks free and confronts his father, demanding to know why Megala was taken. The king says he is in a meeting, but the prince shouts for him to release her immediately. When the king refers to her as the female bandit, Siddhartha declares he will never forgive him if she dies. As the king refuses, the prince draws his sword in front of everyone, asking whether the king finds love disgraceful. The king turns away and reminds him of his royal duty to the kingdom, but Siddhartha continues pleading for Megala's life. Seeing the hatred in his son's eyes, Sadhana finally agrees to free the girl on one condition: that Siddhartha marry Princess Yasodhara of the neighboring realm. Hearing those words, the prince feels a wave of disgust. Yet as the crowd begins chanting for Mala to be executed, he forces himself to stay composed and reluctantly agrees to the demand under pressure. Even so, General Bandaka takes a heated blade and sears both of her eyes. When Siddhartha shouts, demanding to know what he has done, Bandaka replies that he has blinded her so she will never be able to look at him again. Megala urges the prince to stop dwelling on what just happened. And as Mala is dragged away, she cries out to Siddhartha, saying his face will remain burned into her vision for the rest of her life, telling him how grateful she was to have met him and to have treasured their brief moments together. She asks him to grow into a great king before she is taken away, leaving the prince in tears. Not long after, the prince is married to Princess Yasodhara, and although everyone else celebrates, the prince alone is unhappy. King Suddhodana declares to his son that at the moment he was born, the revered monk Asa delivered a prophecy that he would someday become the great Chakravartin king. Meanwhile, the young boy Tata, still clearly just a child, arrives in the kingdom of Koala along with Chupra's mother and the monk Naradatta. Tata insists that Chupra must be somewhere nearby. As they search, the crowd suddenly erupts, shouting that the general is approaching. Tata climbs onto someone's shoulders and discovers that the man being hailed as the general is none other than Chupra himself. Chupra's mother becomes emotional and reflective, while Tata grows excited and asks to go see the general's palace. But Chupra's mother declines, saying that simply seeing her son was enough for her. Later on, Chupra urges Koala's leaders to launch another attack on the Shakya kingdom and seize its rich lands for themselves. Everyone agrees to the proposal and begins preparing, while a messenger rushes to deliver the news of the coming war to Shakya. King Sadhana tells Siddhartha that their nation is small and that it was almost miraculous they had managed to avoid war for so long. But now, he says, conflict seems inevitable. When Siddhartha hesitates, explaining that he despises bloodshed, his father snaps at him, trying to make him understand that if they retreat, Kosala will completely overrun their kingdom. But because the prince still does not grasp the urgency, the king storms off, declaring that with such a mindset, he could never rule as king. Some time afterward, the Kosala forces confront the Sakya troops near a border village. Chupra leads the charge, and Prince Siddhartha is sickened by the carnage. General Bandaka joins him, and remarks that he can simply stay where he is and watch his men die from a safe distance. At that moment, a soldier arrives carrying a container of deadly poison. Bandaka dips his arrows into it, and remarks that no warrior can survive a hit from such venom. Siddhartha asks the general if he truly finds pleasure in watching people die, and Bandaka bluntly answers yes, like a blood-crazed madman. As he heads off to influence the battle, he mocks the prince, saying that a coward like him could never hope to understand. As fighting intensifies, Chupra tears through enemy lines while Prince Siddhartha enters the battlefield. General Bandaka and Chupra both slaughter many soldiers, while Siddhartha rides around shouting for everyone to stop fighting. At that moment, some opposing soldiers spot him, and when Chupra hears that the prince is nearby, he immediately charges toward him. Meanwhile, Siddhartha becomes surrounded as his own men fall while trying to shield him. General Bandaka notices Chupra racing toward the prince and moves to intercept. He fires an arrow at Chupra but misses, then acknowledges the strength of the Kosala warrior, admitting he cannot outmaneuver him with ordinary methods. He then devises a vile plan. He hoists up a fallen enemy corpse and uses it to disguise himself as an ally while riding past Chupra. Once he has positioned himself ahead, Bandaka turns his horse around and shoots Chupra with a poisoned arrow. But instead of collapsing, Chupra rips out the arrow and retaliates, knocking Bandaka from his horse. Afterward, he rides straight toward Siddhartha, while Bandaka wonders why his poison has not taken effect. Chupra charges the prince at full speed. But at the final moment, Siddhartha looks at him with eyes full of compassion, radiating an almost divine aura. Then Bandaka's poison finally activates, causing Chupra to miss his strike. As he tumbles from his horse, he reflects on the sacred presence he sensed, remembering how Siddhartha's gaze pierced into his soul, and wonders if he is destined to die while still burdened by regret. Seeing Chupra collapse and tremble from the poison, Bandaka loudly boasts that he was the one who defeated the enemy general, then orders his troops to crush the opposition. With that, both armies withdraw, leaving behind only devastation and misery. Back at Budai's home in Kosala, a priest explains that the poison has spread throughout Chupra's body and that he cannot be saved. At that moment, Malaka and her father arrive to ask after him, and Budhai responds that it would take a miracle for Chupra to live through the night. Hearing this, a squirrel possessed by Tata races to the slums, returns to his human body, and informs his mother that Chupra is beyond saving. She panics and attempts to rush out to see him before the end, but Naradata stops her, saying that his master may know of a cure. Since Tata can use his abilities to reach the Himalayas in a single night, he promises to deliver the message. Naradata writes a letter and wishes him well. Possessing multiple animals, Tata sprints across distances, takes to the skies, and finally arrives at the temple. The monks watch in shock as he flies in and lands before Master Asia, delivering the letter. The elderly monk is shaken after reading it. He walks to the cliff's edge and sends a spiritual message directly to Naradata. He scolds him for sacrificing the lives of so many animals just to save one boy. But Naradata refuses to back down, insisting he must save Chupra no matter the cost. Hearing this, Master Asia warns that as punishment, he will spend the rest of his life as a wild animal, then tells him the cure. Naradata quickly shouts the antidote's recipe to Chupra's mother before losing his sanity and running off into the wilderness like a dog. She begins to cry when she sees this, but she feels relieved knowing that Chupra will survive. Later, at Budhai's home, Chupra's mother pleads with Budai to administer the remedy to her son. He agrees, and the moment they give it to him, the doctor is astonished to see Chupra open his eyes. At the same time, Siddhartha's wife asks if he is still awake because something is weighing on him. He confides that he feels awful witnessing people fall ill and die every day while he does nothing to help. He wonders if there is anything he can do and whether he should simply look away from it all. He gets up and says that he never realized how much suffering existed due to his privileged life as a prince. Even the Sudras, he says, know more about the world than he does, and he declares his intent to uncover the truth about life. He then tells her not to worry and to get some rest. Back at Budai's mansion, Chupra's mother is locked in the basement while Budi informs the general that Lady Malika came to visit him. When Budai is alone with Chupra, he reminds the boy to stick to the story that he is the son of Lord Budhai and to erase every memory of his life as a peasant. Hearing this, Chupra grows uneasy and questions why this is being brought up now. But when he overhears Budai ordering his servants not to mention the woman who delivered the antidote, he realizes something is wrong. Down in the basement, two men prepare to execute Chupra's mother. Chupra drops down, knocks the larger man aside, and warns the thinner one to get his hands off his mother. The men freeze in shock upon hearing Lord Chupra refer to a peasant as his mother. But before they can tell anyone else, Chupra swiftly draws his sword and silences them. His mother embraces him and tells him how much he has grown. Yet during their emotional reunion, Chupra spots the fat man trying to flee and fails to stop him. He tries to pursue, but his wounds reopen, forcing his mother to carry him up the stairs. When they reach the top, Budai's men surround them, accusing Chupra of hiding the fact that he was a Shudra, while Booty calls him a fool in disappointment. The next day in court, the judge asks Budhai if he truly did not know Chupra was a Shudra when he adopted him, and the general lies effortlessly, causing outrage. Then the guards haul Chupra's mother forward and throw her before the judge, who questions whether she is actually his mother. As Chupra angrily tries to break past the guards, she denies it and claims she once found him on a battlefield, saying he is not the child of a Sudra like herself. The judge asks if she is lying, but Chupra's mother repeats that he is not her son, breaking the boy's heart. At that moment, Chupra tells her she no longer needs to lie and says he is relieved that he no longer has to live in fear of being discovered. The judge then asks if he just admitted to being a Sudra, and Chupra proudly confirms it before wrapping his arms tightly around his mother. The judge is stunned that he would abandon his noble status so easily and tells him he should be ashamed of his lineage. But Chupra answers that he only sought nobility, so he would no longer be treated like garbage in the streets. With that, the judge declares that General Budhai will be placed under house arrest, while Chupra is to be exiled from Kosala. Chupra's mother gives him a gentle smile and says goodbye. However, the judge then sentences her to death as an example, causing Chupra to burst out in fury. He screams that it is unjust and insists she never did anything wrong. He even collapses to his knees and begs them to exile her along with him instead. His mother embraces him and says everything will be all right. But he sobs that living as a peasant means nothing without her and begs the judge to execute him as well. The next day, a huge crowd gathers to witness Chupra and his mother walking through the city. Tata notices what is happening and follows them up the mountain. At the peak, the captain loudly proclaims that filthy Sudras deserve punishment simply for wasting air with every breath and orders his men to throw them off the cliff. But Tata suddenly shouts, distracting them and urging the mother and son to escape. However, one soldier immediately throws a spear, impaling them both. After sharing one last smile, they fall to their deaths. Deep in the valley, even though he has lost his mind, Narita mourns the death of the mother and son he doomed by turning himself into a mindless beast, while Tata runs away in tears. Meanwhile, back in the Sakya kingdom, Siddhartha's wife gives birth to their child, and everyone celebrates the arrival of a new prince. At the same time, Siddhartha steps out of the palace looking exhausted, thinking that although he continues learning, he still feels no closer to the truth he seeks. He feels lost, realizing that everyone is destined to suffer regardless, and struggles to find a way to help people. Now he searches for a way to accept that truth without breaking down. Later, as he meditates beneath the shade of a massive tree, he finally decides to let go of everything in order to find his answer. One night, Siddhartha watches his father sleep peacefully and quietly apologizes for betraying his trust by leaving. Then he rides into the forest. After a while, one of his servants runs after him and begs him to return. Siddhartha tells him to calm down and take the horse back home. The man then watches in shock as the prince removes his luxurious garments and jewelry, handing them over and telling him to take everything to the queen. Nervously, the man asks what he intends to do now, and Siddhartha leaves him stunned by grabbing a blade and shaving off all his hair until he resembles a hard-boiled egg. He gives the hair to the man and instructs him to give it to his wife, along with the message that he will return once he discovers the truth he seeks. Back at the mansion, the queen holds his belongings with tears in her eyes, while the princess weeps as she clutches his hair. At that moment, a messenger arrives to announce that the kingdom of Kosala is launching an attack. The king summons Bandaka and orders him to take command. But Bandaka betrays him, saying he will only do so if he is named the next king. When the king tries to scold him, Bandaka points his sword at him and makes it clear that he will kill him unless he agrees, forcing him to declare Bandaka the new king of Sakya. On the battlefield, Kosala's massive army advances, while Bandaka leads the Shakya troops as their newly appointed ruler. Under his command, the archers rain arrows upon the enemy, cutting down foot soldiers, while Bandaka charges in and cuts men down effortlessly. Then the Kosala troops surge forward with elephants, pushing him back. But Bandaka slices through their arrows, even deflecting them, before leaping over the elephants on his horse and killing them swiftly. He shows off and mocks his enemies for their weakness before slaying yet another soldier, laughing as he shouts that they should all remember the name of their new king. Suddenly, a spear flies directly into his mouth, killing him instantly and bringing the war to an end. Later, Siddhartha walks among the mountain of corpses, feeling overwhelming sorrow for their tragic fate, and gently closes Bandaka's eyes. Then, for the first time in his life, he brings his hands together in prayer and sincerely wishes peace for all the lost souls. After that, he walks away from the kingdom he once called home. Meanwhile, Nerdata continues to live in the forest like a wild animal, while Megala and Tata each follow separate paths. Siddhartha begins his journey in search of the one true path, while his mother watches over him from the heavens. Many years later, on a dark night, a band of thieves ambushes a plump merchant and his camp. The terrified men flee while the gang's leader, now a fully grown Tata, laughs at their cowardice. His men call him over after finding the merchant's valuable goods. Megala is also part of the gang, and she suggests bringing the loot to the nearby village where they are staying. She warns that Kosala is preparing to attack the Shakya kingdom again. Thinking of what Kosala did to his best friend, Tata swears he will make them pay for their crimes. Then he notices someone sitting on a rock and sees that it is only a monk. Tata asks whether he knows Siddhartha, the prince of Shakya who abandoned everything to become a monk. Tata says Siddhartha was foolish to throw away a life of luxury, which irritates the monk, who explains that ascetic monks do not harm themselves for no reason. They do it to gain merit for their next life. Hearing this, Tata simply bursts into laughter, and Megala jokes that she would make an ideal ascetic monk since her whole life has been nothing but misery. After that, she taunts the monk and says that if he truly believes his purpose in life is to suffer, then he should burn his eyes the way she burned hers to prove it. Hearing those words, the monk grabs a torch, drops to his knees, and without a moment of hesitation thrusts the flaming torch directly into his eye socket. The following day, a hunter notices that Siddhartha's hair is far too long for a monk and offers him a razor, even inviting him home so he can clean himself up. Back at the hunter's house, he hands Siddhartha a fresh robe, saying it is all he can give him. Just then, another monk with a burned eye arrives, asking for water. Siddhartha introduces himself, and the monk wonders if he is the Shakya prince he has heard stories about before giving his own name as Dea. Soon after, the hunter returns to say that his eldest child, Asaji, wishes to become a monk as well and asks them to take him in as a disciple. Siddhartha explains that he is not accepting disciples at the moment, and Deppa remarks that the family probably just wants one less mouth to feed. As they head out, Deppa notices Siddhartha staring at him and explains that he burned his eye to show certain skeptics how serious he was. He also tells him that his master, Naradatta, abandoned everything and turned himself into a beast so he could live a pure life free of desire. Deppa says he believes wholeheartedly in asceticism, meaning the more he suffers now, the better his next life will be. After that, they decide to make their way toward the ascetic forest. Along the way, they see a sage trailing behind them through the heavy rain. At one point, when the boy cuts himself on a poisonous plant and nearly drowns, Siddhartha turns back and pulls him to safety. While they walk through a river, Deppa urges Siddhartha to abandon the child because he will never survive the journey. But Siddhartha continues carrying him all the way into the desert. There, they encounter several Kosala soldiers out hunting with their young prince. After killing a deer, the group approaches the monks, and the young prince feels something unusual in Siddhartha's gaze, but then turns away, assuming they are just ordinary monks. Once they are gone, Deppa explains that the boy is actually the prince of Kosala, named Vrhaka, who was born from the Kosalan king and a slave woman from Sakya after the Sakya king deceived him by presenting the slave as a noblewoman. After that, the monks continue traveling for days through scorching heat and dense mountain woods until one night, when Tata and his men spot them from afar and approach to ask Da how he is doing. Deppa simply stares in silence, but Siddhartha tells Tata that the child with them is in terrible condition and desperately needs help. Hearing this, Tata leads them to his camp, where he brews a herbal medicine for a sage-eye. Tata explains that it is made from the few herbs he has available and says that if he still had his powers, he would have collected more by possessing a bird. Siddhartha is surprised to learn he once had the ability to possess animals. And Deppa recalls that his master, Naradatta, once mentioned a special boy with the same name who could inhabit animals yet never grew older. Tata explains that after losing his powers, he suddenly aged and became who he is now. Seeing how poor a Sage-Eye's condition is, Siddhartha asks Tata to bring a heated knife because he plans to cut the swollen leg and suck out the poison. After treating him, Tata brings the knife again to cauterize the wound, and a Sage-Eye convulses from the agony. In that moment, his heart stops, and his spirit drifts into a strange realm where Siddhartha's mother appears and tells him that it is not yet his time to die and that he must follow Siddhartha on his journey until the day his death truly comes. Back inside the tent, Siddhartha performs chest compressions until the boy's heartbeat returns. Just then, Meghala walks in carrying firewood to ask Tata who the visitors are. When Siddhartha sees her, he speaks her name, and she immediately drops the wood the moment she recognizes his voice. As they stand there trembling, her voice quivers as she asks why he has come. Siddhartha apologizes, saying he could not become the great king she once hoped he would be. Overwhelmed, she bolts out of the tent. Meanwhile, both Tata and Deppa are stunned to realize that Siddhartha is the missing prince. Then Tata tells him that he has been searching for him because Kosala soldiers murdered his mother and sister, which is why he despises them so fiercely. But since he has no status, he needs a king's support to begin a war. After venting his rage, Tata begs Siddhartha to become king and take revenge for him. But Siddhartha tells him to wait 10 years while he searches for meaning as a monk and promises that if he fails to find the answers he seeks, he will return to his kingdom. The next morning, Asagi suddenly wakes from a nightmare and warns that a tornado is approaching. As he runs into the village to alert everyone, Tata and the others doubt him, but Asagi keeps sprinting through the settlement, shouting for everyone to evacuate immediately. All at once, a tornado materializes without warning and heads straight for the houses, destroying everything in its path. Asagi saves a boy and takes cover as it sweeps past. When it finally ends, Siddhartha and the others are stunned that a tornado actually appeared. Some time later, not far away in the kingdom of Magadha, the king welcomes Asagi into his court. Asagi asks what the king wishes to know, and when the king asks about his future, the boy answers death. The crowd erupts, shouting at him, but the king silences them and asks who will kill him. Asagi innocently replies that the king's own son will attack him 30 years from now and will face divine punishment immediately afterward. Hearing that, the king smugly tells Asagi that he himself received a prophecy saying he will die when he counts to 3. But the boy keeps smiling and dances around playfully. As the king counts to 3, Asagi calls a guard over, and when the king reaches 3, a snake drops from above. But everyone is shocked when the guard's spear pierces the snake, leaving the boy unharmed. Seeing this, the king realizes Asagi truly can see the future, and the boy says it is simply not yet his time to die. After that, he smiles and reveals that he will die in 4 years, 4 months, and 4 days. The king asks him to stay as his advisor, but the boy refuses, saying his purpose is to accompany Siddhartha until the day Siddhartha dies. The king is startled to hear this and asks where Siddhartha currently is, and Asagi tells him he is now on the Pandava mountains, traveling toward the ascetic forest. That night, the king leads an army up the mountain and finds Da meditating while hanging upside down. The king asks if he is Siddhartha, but Deppa directs him to Siddhartha, who is meditating calmly nearby. After greeting him, the king kneels and asks him to come to his kingdom as an advisor, offering even half of his kingdom in exchange. But Siddhartha tells him he will suffer if greed overtakes him, and he desires more than he needs, and that is the reason he chose to become a monk. Hearing this, the king grows sorrowful as he confides that death is unavoidable, yet he was told that his own son will take his life in 30 years. Terrified of dying, he believes Siddhartha can save him from that destiny. But Siddhartha shakes his head, making it clear he cannot free him from the fear of death right now. However, he hopes he may discover a way to escape that fear during his journey to the ascetic forest. His response satisfies the king, who wishes him good fortune. After that, Asagi and the 2 monks travel for days through unforgiving wilderness, helping people and meditating every single day until they finally reach the forest of the ascetic monks. The moment Deppa steps into the forest, he becomes extremely excited. And when Asagi approaches a beautiful pond, he is completely terrified as a man emerges from it, glaring straight at him. Deppa then explains that holding one's breath underwater, hanging from a tree, burying oneself alive, and undergoing solitary confinement in a coffin represent the highest forms of ascetic training. After that, Siddhartha begins his own training by meditating on thorns at night among wolves and even during thunderstorms, hoping that suffering will lead him to enlightenment. A few months pass, and one day he asks Asagi why he is marking a tree. The boy smiles and explains that he marks every day of the year on a tree, and by the 5th tree, he will die. Siddhartha calls him crazy and asks if he is not afraid of death, to which the boy says he is, but he cannot control it. Hearing this, Siddhartha is impressed and asks how he manages to live each day without fear. The boy answers that his purpose in life keeps him going, just like Siddhartha's purpose is to be reborn as something greater than a human and save everyone. But when Siddhartha asks how he can save all people, a sage simply smiles quietly. As the years pass, Siddhartha continues his ascetic training until one day he screams while buried beneath burning sand, and Deppa lectures him that the pain will lead to salvation. When Siddhartha asks the mad monk if he is telling him to die, Deppa confirms it, explaining that their purpose is to free themselves from their corrupted human bodies. Siddhartha is shocked to hear this, and tells the monk he does not want to die. But the deranged monk becomes furious and orders him to train until he collapses dead. Later, Siddhartha begins to question whether torturing himself is truly the path to saving humanity as his body wastes away. One day, Tata appears and discovers Siddhartha nearly dead, still buried beneath the sand. He digs him out, carries him to a nearby river, and splashes him with water. When Siddhartha regains consciousness, Tata tells him he cannot stand by and watch him die from such foolish training. After that, he sits him under the shade of a tree and offers him a fruit, but Siddhartha refuses because he is fasting. Tata tells him to eat it anyway, but then Deppa and the other ascetic monks arrive and tell him to stop interfering with Siddhartha's training and to leave. Just then, Tata notices smoke rising from his shack and runs toward it in fear for Megala. He finds a gang of scrawny monks with torches calling her a traitor and burning the shack down. Tata strikes them aside and rushes inside, quickly grabbing Megala and carrying her out right before the shack collapses. Later that night, Siddhartha visits him to ask whether he and Megala are all right. Tata tells him she is so sick she cannot even move or speak to him, even though they came all this way to help him. Hearing this, Siddhartha feels awful and goes inside despite Megala begging him to stay away. When he sees how terrible her condition is, he falls to his knees and prays for her. The next day, Deppa tells him to focus on his training, noticing Siddhartha cannot stop thinking about her. Siddhartha says he cannot bear watching her suffer. Deppa responds that it is shameful for a believer in asceticism to fear pain, but Siddhartha argues that no monk in the forest has endured the suffering she is going through. Meanwhile, Tata brings Megala food, but she refuses. She tells him to leave her because there is no hope for her and he will finally be free once she dies. Hearing this, Tata embraces her and promises he will find a way to save her, while Siddhartha silently watches them from outside. The next day, a sage opens Siddhartha's coffin, and Siddhartha asks him if there truly is no way to save Megala. But a sage tells him he can save her the same way he saved him when he was sick, by sucking out the poison. As soon as Siddhartha hears that, he rushes over that night and begins sucking out the poison, which makes Tata worry Siddhartha will contract the disease himself. But Siddhartha continues all night long until he removes every trace of it. The next morning, he skips his training and goes to check on Megala, which enrages Deppa. Back at the cave, Siddhartha finds her completely healed. As Megala cries and Tata thanks him, Deppa and the other monks suddenly appear and declare that they have tolerated enough of Siddhartha's disrespect and order him to leave. However, Tata steps forward and announces that they will leave instead, telling Siddhartha he will no longer wait for him to return and become king for revenge so that Siddhartha may continue his training in peace. He says his anger disappeared when he saw Megala recover, and now he realizes that Siddhartha's mission is far more important. Megala tells Siddhartha she is grateful she fell in love with him, even though it cost her her eyes, because he saved both her body and her heart. With that, the two depart. Tata then tells Siddhartha to become a great monk and make him his first disciple. That night, at the border of the kingdom of Sakya, soldiers are horrified as dozens of tents are crushed within seconds by an army of elephants trampling everything, followed by wave after wave of Kosala foot soldiers. The young prince commands his elephants to ram the gate and orders his strongest warrior, Yatla, to attack. The giant warrior, Hulk-like in size, uses the elephants as stepping stones to launch himself into the air before smashing his mace into the wall and splitting it from top to bottom. This opens the way for the Kosalan army to storm inside, with Yatla clearing the path. Kosalan soldiers shoot down enemy archers like insects and set the guard towers ablaze, while foot soldiers and Yatla slaughter everything in sight. Seeing the devastation unfold, a fat noble rushes to the king and urges him to flee. But he refuses to abandon his people. Meanwhile, Siddhartha's wife tells her son Rahula that once his father completes his mission, he will surely return to save them. Outside, Yatla throws soldiers aside and instantly kills anyone who tries to attack the prince with a single blow before following him deeper into the castle. By sunrise, most of the Shakian forces have been wiped out, and Virhaka claims victory. Later that night in the ascetic forest, Asaji tells Siddhartha that he will die by the next full moon. But Siddhartha finds it difficult to believe since the boy looks perfectly healthy. Asagi predicts that he will be eaten alive by wolves, but Siddhartha promises he will protect him no matter what. Later, while Siddhartha is meditating, Asagi falls off a cliff while trying to steal eggs from a nest. Siddhartha rushes down as fast as he can, only to discover that the boy survived by landing in the bushes. Next, the boy almost drowns in the river, which sends him into another wave of panic. But in the end, it turns out to be nothing more than a harmless fright. Soon after, the night of the full moon comes, and Siddhartha wonders whether the boy will truly die as he foresaw, even though he had tied him to a tree. While he meditates, a rabbit climbs up and begins chewing through the ropes. By the time Siddhartha realizes what happened, the boy has already disappeared. He searches everywhere for Asaji while the rabbit guides the boy through some bushes. Eventually, the child stumbles down a slope and ends up directly before a group of starving baby wolves. Seeing the hungry wolf pups, Asaji smiles, gently pets them, and tells them he will soon fill their stomachs. Then he lies down in front of them, waiting for their parents to come and feast on him. Moments later, Siddhartha catches up and falls the same way. But the sight of the wolves ripping into his small companion leaves him utterly horrified. Panicking, he sprints away as quickly as his frail legs allow and collapses face first in the grass, where he breaks down sobbing loudly. At that very moment, Deppa finds him again and resumes Siddhartha's training with even greater brutality, even going so far as to set him on fire at one point. When he sees that Siddhartha still clings to life, the deranged monk ties him to a tree and lets vultures feed on him. This disturbs the other monks so deeply that they free him and insist that he has suffered enough. Yet Siddhartha refuses to stop, continuing even after 10 days without water, which convinces Deppa that he has reached the height of asceticism. Afterward, Siddhartha begins meditating on a cliff beneath the blazing sun and continues through a violent storm, repeating to himself that he must become one with everything around him. One day, strong winds blow his frail body into a waterfall. When he feels nothing, he wonders whether he has finally merged with nature and whether this is the ultimate form of asceticism Deppa spoke of. However, as he closes his eyes, he suddenly finds himself drifting within an unfamiliar realm where he hears his mother's voice telling him that Asagi's life was meant to reveal the truth that all existence moves in cycles. Hearing this plunges him into despair, but she commands him to keep living. When he awakens, he finds a bowl of soup placed right before his face, and it moves him to tears. At first, he assumes Asagi brought it, but it is actually from a kind woman from a nearby village. After thanking her for saving his life, he walks into the forest, and all the animals gather behind him as he calls them together, explaining the lesson that nature's law dictates that one life must be consumed for another to survive, just as what happened between Asagi and the wolves. But humans are the only creatures who devour one another out of greed, and that is the real source of suffering. Meanwhile, in the kingdom of Kosala, the Sakya king is placed on trial where he insists that further violence is unnecessary. But the Kosala prince vows that he will never forgive the Sakya people and that Siddhartha will die by his hand. Back in the forest, Siddhartha is about to depart when Deppa appears and asks if he truly intends to leave the woods. When Siddhartha confirms it, Deppa swears he will surpass him in self-inflicted suffering and prove that asceticism is the true path. But Siddhartha argues that he now understands extreme practices to be meaningless, which is why he will live a balanced life, walking a middle path between hardship and pleasure. Realizing Siddhartha has chosen a way of his own, Deppa admits defeat. At the border of Koala, the Shakian people are forced into labor until they collapse or are executed daily to satisfy the prince's twisted hatred, while the imprisoned king listens helplessly to the screams of his people from inside his cell. One day, the prince's father grows enraged and demands an explanation for why his son has imprisoned his own mother with the Shakia slaves. The boy coldly replies that she, too, is nothing more than a filthy Shakian slave. His father reminds him she is still his mother, but he insists that granting her special treatment would set a bad example. That night, Yatla visits the prince's captive mother in prison to bring her food from the celebration, but he accidentally drops the bowl. He peeks inside with his enormous head and promises to bring another one. The queen warns him not to return because she is in the women's slave quarters, but Yatla becomes upset and says he will free her because she is the queen. She stops him, explaining that doing so would only create more trouble for her son. When Yatla asks why the prince imprisoned her, she explains that she is guilty of hiding her true status when she married. But Yatla still believes she is a wonderful woman, slave or not. This reminds him of his childhood, when a food shortage struck his village and his family, including his enslaved mother, was mercilessly crushed beneath an elephant to reduce the number of mouths to feed, leaving him alone without them. Hearing his story, the queen calls him a good son but warns him again not to show her kindness, as it will only make him a target for others. Still, Yatla believes the prince will listen to him. Yet when he confronts the prince later, hoping his help in bringing food would matter, the prince has him whipped while chained to the ground and orders him to stop behaving like an idiot. Angered, Yatla asks why he locked up his own mother, and the prince replies that she must be punished for lying and for carrying filthy Shakia blood. When the prince insults her further, Yatla explodes with rage, breaks his chains, and storms out of the castle. Back in his room, the prince recalls how people used to mock him for being the son of a filthy Shakian slave, and how that humiliation drove him to sacrifice everything in pursuit of power. Suddenly, his thoughts are interrupted when a messenger informs him that Siddhartha has been found. He immediately rides out with his army to hunt him down. Once they locate the monk, he orders his men to surround Siddhartha and accuses him of causing his family's suffering, promising to make him pay with his life. After saying this, the boy waits for a reaction, but Siddhartha remains perfectly calm and tells him to take his life if he wishes. Seeing this, the boy declares he will execute everyone Siddhartha loves. But Siddhartha quietly asks whether vengeance even brings him happiness. He adds that such dark thoughts must keep him awake at night, which strikes the prince deeply. Even so, the prince raises his sword to take his head. But at that moment, lightning crashes from the sky, startling him and making him fling the sword away, which lands before Siddhartha. The monk picks it up and approaches the prince with a piercing gaze so intense that the surrounding soldiers retreat in fear. Siddhartha then tells him that these dark thoughts are causing him more suffering than any form of torture ever could, and that this is what makes his life truly miserable. Hearing this, the prince snatches his sword and withdraws in humiliation. Back in his chamber, he remembers Siddhartha's eyes, and the shame of his defeat only deepens his hatred. Just then, a messenger delivers terrible news. A plague is sweeping through the female slaves and will soon reach the palace. He urges the prince to decide whether they should burn them all. After observing the chaos below and thinking it over, the prince orders them to be burned. Outside the prison, Yatla is eating snacks when he hears a commotion about a fire. Realizing the flames are coming from the women's quarters, he charges there at full speed, knocking aside every guard in his path. He smashes through the wall and searches frantically for the queen, ignoring the growing blaze. Once he finds her, the giant breaks them out and fights his way to the castle's front gate, where he tears open a massive hole in the wall and leaves the kingdom forever. Far away in the forest, the queen is pleasantly surprised that Yatla saved her. But Verhaka follows Yatla and discovers them near a pond. At first, Yatla is delighted, thinking the prince came to help his mother. But when he sees that same look of pity in her eyes, the prince becomes enraged and announces that he is the one who ordered the fire. He then commands Yatla to dispose of her and walks away. Horrified, Yatla resigns on the spot and calls the prince heartless. But his mother tells the giant to calm down and let it go for her sake. Hearing this, Yatla softens and walks away carrying her in his arms. After a long journey under the scorching sun, he lets her rest beneath a rock formation, where she asks him why he helped her. He happily replies that she reminds him of his own mother. He says she is a gentle woman just like his real mother, and that is why he wants her to become his new mother. Hearing this brings her great joy. She asks him to let her see his face and promises she won't be frightened because he is a good boy, which astonishes Yatla since people had always called him a monster his entire life. He removes his mask and slowly turns around to reveal his soft, kind face. The queen tells him she would happily take the place of his mother. Imagining a joyful life with his new mother makes Yatla incredibly happy, and he tosses his mask aside. But a few days later, When he returns carrying fruit, he finds her unconscious and drops everything to the ground. He soon realizes she has died, and he begins crying loudly, his wails echoing across the wasteland. Afterward, he carries her body for a long distance into the forest, where he digs a grave while tears run down his cheeks as he gently lays her inside. That night, he sleeps with his arms wrapped around her grave. And the next day, he begins wandering aimlessly through various lands and cities, feeling crushed and sorrowful, unable to sleep at night, just like the prince, who is now equally lonely. One night, he finally succumbs to despair and jumps from a waterfall. But even that cannot kill him, as his monstrous body somehow survives the crash. In agony, he begs the Lord of Thunder to strike him down and end his suffering, but nothing happens. He then walks through the river until sunset, when he suddenly notices a glowing light deep within the forest ahead. There he discovers Siddhartha quietly meditating in silence. Yatla approaches slowly and collapses to his knees before him, saying he wants to die because he is the unhappiest man alive. Siddhartha softly asks why he is in such sorrow. Yatla explains that his real parents were crushed by an elephant, and he lost his second mother to the plague just as soon as he had found her. Hearing this, Siddhartha gently responds that it was actually his parents who were the truly unfortunate ones. But Yatla ignores that and angrily demands to know why the prince who abandoned his own mother never faced punishment. Siddhartha listens calmly and then explains that the prince is the one who has suffered the most, because as a prince whose mother was a slave, he was forced to act heartless all his life and helplessly watch her die. And now he must live knowing he carries the blood of thousands, and of his own mother, on his hands. Meanwhile, Prince Veridhakar rushes to his mother's grave and drives away hyenas attacking it before frantically digging her out, tears pouring down his face. He embraces her cold body and begs her to call out her ungrateful son's name one more time and forgive him, because he had no choice but to remain as cold as necessary in order to govern without ever appearing weak. Back in the forest, Siddhartha quietly repeats that without question, the prince is one of the most miserable boys in the entire kingdom. He adds that someone who has personally known suffering, like Yatla, should be able to understand the pain of others more deeply than anyone. Hearing this, the giant becomes overwhelmed with both grief and anger at once, grabs his head, and screams before slamming it against the ground in frustration. Then Siddhartha gently rests his warm hand on the giant's shoulder and shares that he, too, lost his mother shortly after being born, but because she brought him into the world, he was able to meet Yatla now. He explains that all life has purpose, and that there is a fragile connection linking every living being. If Yatla had not existed, this balance would have been disrupted, meaning he is significant. He says that Yatla has been fulfilling his purpose and influencing many lives simply through his existence. Hearing that his life has meaning leaves Yatla speechless. Siddhartha reminds him that he has saved many people, giving the example of his real parents when they first saw him, then the comfort he gave Prince Firtaka's mother through kindness, and finally the peace he brought the prince, who can now rest knowing his mother was treated with compassion by someone. With tears welling up, Yatla asks again whether someone like him deserves to keep living after having so much blood on his hands. And Siddhartha reassures him that he does. This touches the giant so deeply that he calls Siddhartha a great man and asks to become his disciple. But Siddhartha humbly declines, explaining that he is still a student in training and also in the midst of learning, just like Yatla himself. So, just like Tata, Yatla begs him to make him his first disciple once his training is complete and promises he will wait as long as needed. Then he thanks him for revealing the true meaning of life and leaves. At that moment, Siddhartha is stunned by everything he said and wonders what came over him during that moment. Just then, the sun rises and Siddhartha sees the old man he encountered in his childhood, bathed in its radiance. The old man tells him that he has achieved enlightenment and grants him the title of Buddha, meaning the awakened one. He then instructs him that his mission is to spread his teachings to humanity for as long as life continues and to guide people on how to live. At that moment, the spiritual realm becomes visible to Siddhartha, and a familiar voice explains that people are like lotus flowers at birth, blossoming with infinite potential. But it is tragic that so many beautiful flowers become lost in the mud. That is why it is his responsibility as the Buddha to help those flowers bloom. Siddhartha joyfully accepts the role given to him. Not long afterward, Prince Verdaka frees the Shakian slaves while Tata, Megala, and the monks carry on with their lives. And Siddhartha begins a long journey as the Buddha to save humanity. But this is where the video concludes. Remember to like and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.